Are all counted. Joining me now live on the ground from New Hampshire is Luke Vargas of Talk Media News. Luke, welcome.
Thank you. Good evening.
Thanks for being with us. Bernie and Donald Trump are both favored to win today. Does it still seem that way on the ground?
It does seem that way on the ground, and it seems that way in early exit polls, which we're just getting now. Polling locations closing across most of the state just about 3 minutes ago. It's going to be another hour until they close in some of the more urban districts, if you want to call it that. But here's what we're seeing. 66, and these are not exit polls that are going to indicate exactly who people are voting for necessarily, but you can figure it out. 66% of Republican primary voters today said they're in favor of a ban on Muslims entering the United States. You can deduce that this is going to benefit Donald Trump, the front runner. Switching over to the Democratic side, we're seeing slightly lower youth turnout, the under 30 vote, not quite at levels that we saw in the 2008 primaries when Barack Obama was in the contest, but 2/3 of Democratic primary voters today say they want to replace the current healthcare system in the United States with one that is single payer and taxpayer funded. So these are sort of early indications that the electorate in New Hampshire is eager to go behind Bernie Sanders on the left and likely Donald Trump on the right.
Wow. The Clinton camp has ramped up its attacks on Sanders over the last couple days. How does that appear to be impacting the race? Is that helping or hurting Hillary Clinton, having Bill go all big dog on Bernie?
The conventional wisdom is that those sorts of attacks dampen voter enthusiasm. They don't actually encourage people to want to vote for the candidate doing the attacking. Though we have seen in one core constituency of what we consider Hillary Clinton's demographic base, older women over 50, it does seem to have helped her support. But when it comes down to younger women under 30, you've got 87% of them in this state indicating they back Bernie Sanders. These are not people who really care what Madeleine Albright has to say. They're not people who are necessarily convinced when Bill Clinton comes out there and accuses Bernie Sanders supporters on the internet of spreading sexist messages. They care much more about the progressive chops of a candidate. And that's the final anecdote I'll share from these exit polls. You're seeing a almost 20% increase versus 2008 in the number of Democrats who consider themselves liberal. The party is moving to the left. On the Republican side, 12% more declaring themselves as conservative. So the electorate is widening, but particularly among young people, it is not the gender of the candidate they seem to care about. It's how progressive they are, and that, in this state at least, strongly favors Bernie Sanders tonight.
And finally, Luke, New Hampshire is an open primary state, so you don't have to declare your well, I guess you can change it at the last minute or whatever, but the point is that independents can vote. They can choose whether they want to vote in the Republican or Democratic primary. And to what extent is that, A, influencing how everything's shaking out, and B, are there any indications of mischief making, like, back in the day when George Wallace, in Michigan, Republicans in droves voted for George Wallace in the Democratic primary to send him off to embarrass the Democratic Party?
We're not hearing any of the latter. But about the former, I mean, look, independents are a crucial part of the New Hampshire electorate. In this case, what we're seeing is on the Democratic side, there's a lot more confidence among voters that Bernie Sanders is going to win. And it actually sometimes can fuel what we call an expectation bounce for the underdog, which is that for the favored candidate, their people don't come out quite as much because the assumption is they're going to win. I believe that we are going to see many of these independents, and this is something that people have told me over the past few days, instead of going to the Democratic ballot, which they have in about 2/3 to 3/4 majority in the past few elections, going to Republicans, picking a Republican they'd like to see on the ballot come November. Even if they don't plan to vote for that person, they at least want to have a say in who the nominees and the parties are. And if they feel like this is already a state going for Bernie Sanders, why give my extra vote to him? I could have more impact trying to shape the outcome on the Republican side of things. So actually, I would predict the math changes a little bit, that independents here in New Hampshire tonight move towards the Republican ballot more than they have in elections past, just because it really does seem like Bernie Sanders has a commanding enough lead that it might be dampening some of the urgency for his voters to get out there and cast their ballots for him.
In that case, last question, Luke, and a very quick one. Are those people who might be strategically voting in the Republican primary doing so to screw up the Republic? In other words, would they be, for example, if I was an independent in New Hampshire, I might vote for Ted Cruz because I think he's easier to beat, or I might vote for Donald Trump because I think he's going to be easier to beat. I would avoid voting for Kasich or for Bush, who I think would be, frankly, harder to beat, whether it's Bernie or Hillary. Is that the kind of thing you're talking about? Or are you talking about people who just, sometimes they're Democrats, sometimes they're Republicans, and this time they've decided they found a Republican they like?
I've asked that to people. It's such an interesting question. The media loves to think about the prospects of that. It's like, right below a broker convention is people sabotaging the other party. But the reality is most people say, independents who usually lean to the left say, look, each one of these candidates on the Republican side has said something that makes them unpalatable to me. There's not an easy favorite. I mean, Jon Huntsman would have been the guy in 2012 that Democrats would have voted for in the Republican primary to try to derail the Republicans and have them pick someone that their own base wouldn't want. I think the candidates, it's a big field on the Republican side, but most of the candidates who still remain are acceptable enough to the base that there's not a clear favorite to who people would switch to if they really wanted to mess the things up. I think this vote is going to split in many, many different directions, and we're going to be having a discussion around South Carolina with just as many unanswered questions in 2 weeks than we have tonight.
Fascinating stuff. Luke Vargas, Talk Media News. Thank you, Luke.
Thank you, Tom.
Let's turn things over to tonight's politics panel.